Coming up on Oily Trash Movies.
The door opening slowly when we're trying to see the first dinosaur come out with
and it's lower. It takes like a minute for the the door to slowly open.
Because there's moments where I just like destroy things because it just like doesn't fit with, I don't know, like I have like this mental like break and I just destroy everything and get rid of everything, burn everything. Yeah, it's like have a...
Alright, and we're live. Hello, and welcome to Oily Trash Movies. This is the only podcast where two people watch a movie and say unfunny things the entire time. We're your hosts. I'm Daddy Warbucks.
Hello, everyone. I do not support burning things up. And I'm Bubblegum Barbie.
And today we've got a great episode before we hop into the 2024 season, which it is 2024, but our 1 year anniversary is actually February 6th. So we're hoping to hop back with some new episodes then. And until that, we're going to go over our year in review for 2023.
Oh man, I'm excited because we are Oily Trash Movies, the only podcast that reviews movies of all time and all of YouTube and all of the internet. I think reviewing the grossest films is the best.
All right, well, we've got some real stickers here, and I know you said you don't condone burning anything, but some of these film reels, some of these scripts probably have been tossed on the bonfire.
I think it would be great to, I know there's this YouTube videos that they, like, when they destroy laptops, they, like, bash it with hammers, and then they throw oil, and then they throw water at it, and then they burn it, stomp on it, and then they run a bicycle over it, and then they run a car over it. I think that's exactly what some of these movies should be done, or they should be not even filmed. Once they're written, just throw it in the dumpster. Just throw it in the fire, the pit of hell.
Or just snap the pencil that you're using to write with, or break the keyboard over your knee and just don't even write it. That would have also been, nip it in the bud, as they say.
Or when you dream about it at night and you say, "Ooh, this is a great movie," you wake yourself up from the dream and you slap yourself. It's like, no, forget about it.
All right, yeah. So starting out here, this is Bubblegum Barbie's number 10 most oily movie. I'm going to pause for the drum roll effect that we're going to add in post. And this here, Spare Parts.
Spare Parts. Oh gosh. The reason why I did not like this movie is because it had everything that is awesome. It had the hot babes. It had the action. It had the idea of like bionic,
cyborg
chicks.
Robot warriors in a coliseum.
It had it had the cyberpunk to it, which also / gladiator into it, and I was going into it like WWE, the gorgeous babes wrestling kind of mindset, and it's not at all what I got.
Yeah, this, I think, in part scored so low because we had such high expectations coming in. This is one of those movies where I'll say they fumbled it on the 1 yard line. The premise is amazing. Even the practical effects that they got were pretty top tier, but the filmmaking itself let this movie rot. And I think the main issues was, one, the lighting was completely static. We had garish red and blue lighting, which we've talked about in a million episodes. It's cool when you have garish lighting for one scene. When the entire movie is filmed like that, it just becomes boring. And the fights themselves also had no ramp up of intensity. And the entire movie was a homogeneous mess. And by the time you got to the final fight scene, it's just the same thing you've seen 3 or 4 times already. And such a lackluster display. I think in the right hands, this movie could have become a cult classic.
It could have, but it didn't. Also, another thing that was very disappointing about this movie was the location was badass. It was at a literal junkyard. And I thought that was great. Going back with the fight scenes, as you mentioned, do you remember that scene where they were in the Jesus Last
The
Supper
Last
imagery with,
Supper, yeah.
yeah, and then there was these supposedly best guys, best fighters, bad dudes. And rather than showing us the fight between these dudes, it literally just panned on the people eating the supper and reacting to the fight.
Not only were they were reacting during strobe lighting, which literally gave me a headache and probably induced seizures in some of the audience.
Gosh, it was so bad. And the thing that really bothered me about this movie is that they had such a great practical effects team that chainsaw or what was it with the face? Do you remember
Well, the
that?
motorcycle wheel was
Yes.
spinning, and the guy, and that was a digital effect, but they blended the digital effects with the practical effects
Was
pretty
it a
well. Yeah,
was it
that
a
was
digital
that was
effect?
definitely
Oh,
digital.
I don't remember so much of it, but I remember that scene was stellar. It was so cool. And that's the only thing the movie had. Thinking back, I think what made it terrible was the characters were kind of generic
Well, you had like the
and
boyfriend who was literally at the last place they were 2 miles away, and then like 3 to 7 days later, he finally makes his way to the junkyard. Like, where have you been? Yeah, again, this movie had so many great set pieces and so much. It was the perfect premise, and to bumble it like they did, really, really disappointed us in a way that I don't think. We've had some pretty big major disappointments, but that I
mm.
think was the one that hurt us the most.
Oh yeah, it did. It hurt because it had so much good potential. As an indie film overall, it had it succeeded but failed and man, I don't the way I really think that film would be saved would be by going through some rewrites
I think
mostly.
you just need a different director. A different director could have taken that script and made something awesome because
Yeah,
even
that's true.
even if the script didn't have some things thought out entirely, the fact that you've got a movie that's a coliseum brawl with cyborg chicks, you really can't go wrong with that premise. Even because it's a very campy premise. It's very like RoboCop 2 where you have like samurai robots. It's like, okay, that doesn't actually make sense, but it's still fun to watch. This movie should have been fun to watch, and instead it was a boring slog. So that's why it wound up on number 10 of the most oily movies on Bubbles' list. It was number 11 for me. It just missed out on my top 10, but I'm glad we got it in there because that is a movie I wanted to talk about. But moving on, number 9 for
Drum
both.
roll.
Drum roll, please, for both Bubblegum Barbie and Daddy Warbucks. This was Murder Size. And, this was actually another movie that I think we came into
Mm-hmm.
with
True.
sort of high expectations because the trailer was cut so perfectly. It feels almost cruel for us to knock on this one too much because it really is low budget. Even though we review low budget indie films, even among that genre of films, this should have been a bonus episode, I think. So I feel,
Yes, I was just gonna say what we always said. It should have been a bonus episode.
but you know what? It still looked good enough that we inducted it into our full episode. So that is kind of an achievement for the directors here. I believe that was A&P Productions. Like Andrew and Paula were their names. I don't think that's right, but it was A&P. And really, we loved the writing in the first act. There was some good comedy, but by the third act, we were both lost with the serial killer B plot, where it became like an awful skin crawling sexploitation film. I was not into that at all. Some of the kills were pretty uninspired, and again, it's another movie where you've got a premise where, okay, they're in a gym because they're exercising. Like, you could come up with a lot of cool set pieces, but they didn't have a gym to film in. They filmed in like some terrible office building where they couldn't even fit the yoga mats into that little room.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that. that film is hilarious, but it has potential to be a cult classic of oily trash movie, because there's that scene where you were like, touch my boo.
If the third act wasn't genuinely offensive to my sensibilities as an audience member, I would have this would have just wound up somewhere in the middle of our list. But the fact that they had these creepy rapists, I didn't get into that part.
Also, I love the character Chuck. The Chuck character was a lot of fun. The gothic bad chick was really cool.
We had the scene where the girl was hyped up on cocaine. That was a lot of fun. I think the writer shines better with the comedy scenes than with when it tried to actually become a legitimate horror movie. If they had stayed in a lane where we're going to keep this campy and fun and not try to make it like a gross out skin crawl fest at the end, I think we would have both liked this a lot more. But, there might be an audience for that kind of film. Mm-hmm. It's just, I don't think it's to our taste.
Yeah, it's not really to our taste. And also, not only was that movie confusing for us to review, I believe that my review for that movie was very confusing for our audience, because there was that, I'm going to try really hard to explain this as 100% better than what I did originally. When in the third act, it being in an office building, and they couldn't get the characters in a place that made sense.
Okay, what Bubble's trying to say here is that the geography of the building stopped making sense because characters were just teleporting here and there.
Yes.
Characters were moving to different areas where they obviously would have crossed paths. This was even in the movie, it was sort of like a dinky sort of film production set where everything was cramped, everything was small and stacked on top of each other.
Yeah.
And I think the most egregious scene was where we had our lead character literally just appear behind the murderer and hit him on the back of the head with a hammer and kill him. And this took place in a room that is established as having only one door and one entrance, but she phased through the wall to get in behind him somehow. It made no sense. But, I get it. When you're that low budget, your location, you sort of got to work with the location that you can afford. But again, I think just the amount of sleaze is really what killed it for me. Maybe Limpy would have loved the movie when the guy had the woman tied up and was sucking on her toes and stuff.
I know that there was also a scene where the bad guy, one of the bad guys was two different places at the same time. And that's how crazy that film was.
All right, up next, this is my 10th most oily movie and Bubbles' 8th most oily movie. This is Aquarium of the Dead.
Oh, God. The jumping the fish. Come on.
This is, I believe, our only sci-fi original, and this movie's number one sin was that it was boring. It was a fucking boring, awful movie with terrible CGI monsters that just waddled in place.
Oh, man, and it's the one oily movie that had a really big actor and was pushing for that, but it was so terrible. Even that actor was just trash. The acting was not that great.
My favorite part, if you go back and watch that episode, there's a scene in which she was like Ukrainian or some sort of Slavic woman. She gets her foot bit by a shark, a CGI shark, and she's trying to get away from it, but it's pulling her back. And then there's another scene that is through the camera, through the security camera, because we had Vivissa A. Fox, who was never on set with any of the other characters. She was just in the security room watching them all on TVs. When it showed her about to jump over the shark, it was the exact same scene. She was leaning over with her foot behind her, acting like there was a shark biting it, but there wasn't a shark yet in that scene. And it was a mess. You could tell this movie was just made on a razor thin budget. 90% of the budget probably went to Vivissa A. Fox to put on sci-fi and run ads and
Or it was a money laundering scheme of a film.
that that could have been the case. This is a movie that had absolutely no creative vision behind it. It was a corporate, we run sci-fi.com or sci-fi channel. We need to produce X many movies a year so we can sell this many advertisements and get this many ratings.
And hiring and LA actors.
Yeah, it is without a doubt one of the least.
Do you remember that scene of Aquarium of the Dead where she was falling? You know, obviously green screen because she was never on set with all the other actors. She was falling, and there was like an editing error, and it just was hilarious. It was, oh, goodness gracious.
This was just the least inspirational movie I think we have on our list. This is the kind of movie that I watch and I think, I don't want to make movies. Movies suck.
Yeah.
This makes the whole art genre of filmmaking, it calls it into question. You know,
Yeah.
it casts a shadow on an entire form of creation.
This is the kind of movie that makes you question if it is art. Like, what is art? Do I want to be part of art? Because I don't want to make this kind of art. Essentially, I think it was just a scheme. Really, that's my guess. It was a movie making laundry scheme.
Yeah, it's a sci-fi original, and yeah, I will never watch a sci-fi original again. I don't think that is beyond oily trash. And the worst part about it is that you can't even make jokes about it. It's so boring and so flat that it's not even like a good movie, like a good bad movie where you can sit around, drink, and like crack jokes. It's just fucking boring. I hated it. Moving on. My number 8, Bubblegum's 6th most oily movie, Alone at Night.
Whoa! Yeah, that movie was. She was never alone. She always had.
She was never alone, and like it was always daytime too. It was very rarely night. And this is the famous slasher movie with no slashing. I don't think there was a drop of blood in this entire film, and some of the kills happened off camera.
Wrong. The title screen, you know, the counting down the days had blood on it. It was that effect.
That was the most fun part, I think.
The music was pretty good. It had a really good, fun score to it. I did, in comparison to all the movies we have gone through already, I did like these characters a little more. But
well, this was the movie where we couldn't even we were completely confused about which guy survived to the end, and we didn't even realize it until during the editing process that it was the other guy with the blonde ponytail and beard who survived.
So true. We were so confused with which one was the cousin and which one was the handyman. Like, we had no idea the handyman was dead the whole time. Oh gosh, it took me like a whole day to finally, I think it was like 3 days to finally understand the plot of the movie and the pizza guy being there. Like the whole, we had a discussion. I remember we had a slight debate about the pizza guy's body being in that weird little cubby thing.
Yeah, he was like in like a burlap sack or something.
Yeah, and then we didn't realize that the neighbors were killed, and that it was just a mess. We did not understand.
Yeah, this movie was a mess. It had no clarity as to what was happening. And we do pay attention to the movies we watch, and the fact that we didn't know which character was which is pretty damning.
Yeah.
I don't have too much to say about this. It needed more murders. It needed all of those classic slasher moments. You know, like there was the scene where she's in the bathtub and she's got the Jason mask on and she's doing her cam show. There needed to be the scene where she like looks up and someone's looking through the window at her and then they run away. She goes, "Oh my God," and like jumps out and like throws her robe on and is looking around the house and maybe sees footprints and knows someone is stalking her and gets scared and calls Pamela Anderson, the police officer, and says something and like, "All right, we'll send someone out there."
Oh gosh, that movie is ridiculous. It's just thinking back to the officers, both of them, and knowing that I still haven't looked up the other officer. I think he's probably an artist, a known artist.
He was a rapper.
Yeah, and then we had
believe.
Pamela.
Was it like Raz or something?
Yeah, something like that. And then we also had Luis Guzman. He was in it. And I think that was another one where it's
that was a pandemic movie where they just had some of these big actors like, oh, well, we'll just structure the movie so it's like you're on a Zoom call, so you can just record on Zoom.
Right. Right. Yeah,
which is fine.
Which is fine. I think the fact that it's so low in comparison to Spare Parts, I think the reason why I put it there was because of the plot. It didn't have any slasher in it. She was never alone. I think the way you would fix it, if she was by herself and like exactly like you said previously, where she starts finding all these footprints and she's been isolated legitimately, where at that time of 2020 people were isolated, that would have been terrifying. They had a great premise to go by and they didn't do it. She always had visitors. People were always bugging her. It was still trash.
Well, the problem was that there were just no kills, and I think how you fix that movie is, instead of having the woman at the cabin at night, you say, like, okay, well, it's pandemic, so we're all going to go out and hide out in the woods, and you have her and, like, 3 or 4 of her friends, and you have, like, these hot babes. You know, you go the kill her goats route, where you have 3 or 4 hot babes in this cabin, getting all soapy, taking bubble baths together, having pillow fights, and then one by one they get killed off, and eventually you have, you know, your heroine who is alone at night, and she gets the upper hand on the killer and stabs him or does whatever. But we didn't have any of that.
And then adding to that,
boring.
Adding to that idea, because it was a cam girl film, making all those girls be cam girls, and they're all in the mansion doing their cam
have their
girl
boobs
stuff.
out the entire time,
and then they're slowly dying from like one of their devoted oily trash fans following them and killing them off. Yeah.
All right, moving on. This is Bubbles' 7th most oily movie. The Deep House.
Oh, God.
Which I still contest. You were too hard on this movie, I think.
Hated the movie because it was boring. It didn't make sense. The physics were all off. Like, didn't make sense. You know, the fact that, what was it, when she falls down and then...
oh, yeah. She cut the rope and she falls to the bottom of the underwater house.
Yeah. And then, like, being trapped in there. It was a big budget movie that just sucked, and I hated it. And you could just tell it was just too Hollywood for me, of it just being they have no excuses for it to be as trashy as it was.
It's another movie like Spare Parts, where you have a great premise. And we talked about this. Everyone's afraid of being underwater, trapped in the dark, claustrophobic. You're drowning. There's no oxygen. You can't see. You're in a tight spot. There's ghosts.
Oh my God.
Like, it's every scary thing that you could think of. And they fucked it up so bad.
They fucked it up so bad that, like I mentioned in that episode, I'm claustrophobic. And yesterday, I literally locked myself in the bathroom. And I was more afraid of that than this movie. Like, this movie was not scary. It was ridiculous. And it was literally a movie just to show off their gadget. What was
their drone? They had that drone that got possessed by boomer ghosts.
Possessed by those boomer ghosts. Like, they shouldn't have removed that Jesus from that door. Oh, and yeah, the story of it, the plot of why the house is the way it is, haunted, was so stupid. That didn't make sense. Like, that plot was ridiculous. I
still applaud the movie, though, for just the technical feat of having that underwater set. I did not like it. I don't think it was a good movie, but I didn't shit on it as hard as you.
Oh, yeah.
It did not make my top 10 worst.
It was trash because it was a big budget movie. And it was so bad. It was worse than Spare Parts, everybody. That's how bad of a movie it was. And this one was like, the like $1 billion budget. Like, come on. No excuses.
I don't know if I don't think the budget was that big.
It was
It certainly wasn't $1 billion.
It was $1 million
$1 million
at least.
Okay.
At least. And that drone probably cost $1 million, I'm saying, because that movie was made just to show off their drone. Lionsgate was like really proud that they owned that drone. They paid money on it. They bought it and they're like, let's make a movie. How can we do it? Underground deep house. That's all it was. It was just a yes man kind of premise.
It's such a great premise, too. All right, moving on. This is my 7th most oily movie.
Okay.
And your 4th most oily movie. So you really hated that one. And we're talking about Float. This is another one of those movies where absolutely nothing made fucking sense. We had it's still not clear if, like, was this a ghost? Was this a monster? Was this just like a regular person?
It was what a person you needed with a ghillie suit.
It was a guy with a ghillie suit, but like, what did that have to do with the river? Like the fact that they're floating down the river is completely it's I can't think of the word right now. The fact that they're floating down the river is completely irrelevant to this ghillie suit ghost because he kills people out in the woods. So it is not. He's not like a river spirit.
Remember that one individual who was like drowning? She was like drowning in the water and died.
Yeah, a couple people. One person fell into the water and just completely disappeared. Yeah. Like, what happened to them?
No blood, nothing. She's just like, there was bubbles, lots of bubbles. I did like that scene though. That's a hard, doesn't matter, indie film, higher budget, like having to do that in water is difficult. Having to make someone drown like that's cool. But overall, come on, you had they had hot babes, they had hot dudes.
Wow. The babes were mediocre. We didn't get a lot of clicks in our thumbnails, so there wasn't that many hot babes. But this movie could have easily wound up on my top 10 because it is so bad that it's almost fun to think about and talk about because it's very baffling. And the fact that the main antagonist, there's so much ambiguity about it, it just makes the whole script fall apart because it's like, well, what are the rules behind this thing? There was a scene where they're littering and it like shows like the view of the ocean, seeing like the litter, and then they dump their dead friend's ashes into the river. But none of these things were plot points. Mm-hmm. How you fix it is like, oh, you know, maybe the guy who you fucking dumped his ashes, maybe he's like a killer and his spirit is now in the water, or you know, maybe you had a witch place a hex on these people and like, or he drowned or something. Like, you can string together a plot, and there wasn't one.
Yeah, and they attempted to do a red herring. Remember with that hobo dude?
Yes.
And then it turns out that he is a bad guy. Like the audience is supposed to think he's a bad guy, and then we find out, oh, he's trying to save them, but then he ends up becoming, I guess, a bad guy. I don't remember.
He kind of was the bad guy and the good guy. Yeah. It's like they tried to do both. It made no sense.
It made no sense. It was so dumb. Oh yeah, that scene when that guy, like one of the first dudes, I guess the dad, the Ryan guy.
Yeah. Or he like shoves his little girl into the water so he can save the hot babe who's drowning. Yeah. The worst part about that little girl scene is when he shoves her away and they're like, oh my god, where's the little girl? And they're like, oh, there she is. And she's just like standing out in the woods like waving. And then it just cuts and she's gone.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that movie was so bad. It was so bad. I think, again, that had to be filmed in 2020, right? Like
I don't know.
Do you remember the plot where the reason why they couldn't leave the river is because the guy put the keys from the RV in that floating thing?
And he's like, I'm going to go walk back up the shore looking for the keys. Like, you're never going to find those fucking keys. Like, those keys are gone.
They're gone. Why did you put it in the floating cup holder? You should have put it in your waterproof phone case, which I'm sure you had.
Yeah, you just put the keys up above your visor in your car and you come back. And
what a stupid movie. It was such a
taking your keys out into a river is a bad idea. I don't care who you are.
The river was not scary.
And how you do a float like that anyway is you park one car down at the destination and then you drive up to the takeoff place and then you float down the river and then otherwise you're stranded, you know?
Yeah. I think for me, for it to be fixed, for it to be higher up than where it is, it would have been making it more slasher. The classic, you're floating down the river and your friends die one by one, which it did, but I don't know. I guess it wasn't slasher enough for me. It was boring. The plot did not make any sense. Yeah, no potential for it being a cult classic at all. So,
Yeah, it was a mess.
it was
This
a
movie
mess.
was completely a mess, and all you had to do was just give any sort of explanation as to what's happening.
Yeah, the guy in the ghillie suit was the lake monster. It was the ichthyoid or the
The
manfish.
ichthyoid.
Yeah.
Classic. Speaking of Manfish, let's move on to number 6, my worst oily movie, Manfish.
I loved this movie. I think
First of all, no, you didn't. This is a few up from your bottom 10, and you shit on the movie the entire time we watched it,
yeah,
and you gave a horrible review on it.
but it's so oily that it's a classic. It's so bad that it's good. The writing was hilarious. I think this has potential to be a cult classic because it's kind of like The Office kind of humor. It's that UK kind of.
Dry, boring British humor. I've said this many times. I'm not a fan of British humor. I think why I hated this movie so much was because I hated the main character. He
Yeah.
wasn't a down on the luck, lovable loser type character. He was just a completely incompetent man child that I wanted to see fail. You know, when you have a movie like this and you have a guy who's just a complete fuck up, you got to make him likable so that the audience roots for him to overcome this terrible situation he's in. We didn't have that. I wanted the manfish to get sold on the black market, honestly, and I wanted this guy to cry about it. That movie needed a rewrite. I was not a fan of Manfish.
What would have fixed it and would have made it very top tier. It is an indie film that did receive a lot of awards, and what would have made it acceptable as acceptable was I can't say that word right now. Would have been if Manfish made it very campy. If they made it very what's that show Ball Python, or what's that classical British
Monty Python.
Monty Python. It was so campy. It was so out of stupid comedy. I think if Manfish really played on that, like there was a moment where they hesitated on having him a seaweed comb over, but they didn't want to do that because that was too campy, too hilarious, or too kind of silly. If they continued with that mindset, it would have fixed the movie, and I think it would have been great.
Maybe. I still think that what you do is you replace your 40-year-old bald man with a teenage character, and you have it sort of have those teenage rom-com vibes, but you draw the humor from the fact that the romantic interest is a manfish, an ichthyoid. And I think he could have done a lot with that. This is another one that the premise was pretty solid, but the execution, I personally hated. You didn't hate it as much as I did. It wound up in my top 10 most oily films, but
I think if they tried to take it way too seriously, If they would have had fun and just making like Napoleon Dynamite, just making things over the top, it would have fixed it. And that's it.
yeah, I agree because the plot involved both human trafficking and busting up drug deals in this like supposedly goofy comedy about a guy falling in love with a fish. And I think what you do is you lower the stakes. Actually, it's like maybe he's like got a bowling team and he's trying to get he's trying to win like the bowling tournament, and one of his friends breaks his hand or something and can't bowl. So you have like this fish has to come in and help him win the bowling tournament, or just something that's way more goofy and suitable to the tone of the movie.
Right. Oh, and then the cat stuff. Do you remember the whole cat side plot?
The dog. It was dogs.
The dogs. That was get rid of that. Or
all right.
Make the fish actual fish eating the dogs. Like, It was
Yeah, it was
stupid.
that was bizarre. There were some bizarre choices with like the B plots, but
Okay,
whatever. That's enough about
moving on.
Manfish. Moving on. This is both Bubbles and Wars' fifth most oily movie, and this is a more recent one. This was The Friendship
Oh,
Game.
oh man. Ugh, this movie. I hate this movie so much. I don't even want to talk about it first. You go.
Yeah, this movie is what I. It's as though the director took this terrible tween horror movie and then tried to turn it into like a Quentin Tarantino or like an art house type film, but the writer and the director I don't think had any talent when it came to bringing sort of such a complex vision to life, because both the script and the sort of artsy way that the continuity of the movie would jump back and forth in time were both total flops. It was a complete mess. And there was no reason to structure the film like that. And if you do structure it like that, where you go back and forth, you have to be revealing something in the past that adds clarity or gives, or you in the future part of the scene, you are dealing with the repercussions or the consequences of what happened with the cutback when they are making their wishes. And everything in this film, as we talked about, was stolen from another movie, whether it be Wish Upon or any of like the terrible low budget multiverse films that it seemed like that B plot was just shoehorned in for no reason. I have very little positive to say about this film.
So do I. This film, as already spoken by you, is a stolen film, and it's didn't succeed at all. It's not even like Grim Cuddy. Grim Cuddy is. I have that holds a special place in my heart. But this film, The Friendship Game, bugged me so much. I despise this movie so much because it is as if I were to make a movie and trying to be deep. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I was just about to say, if you are a 12-year-old who kind of likes artsy movies, but you're still a 12-year-old, so like your tastes aren't mature, you might like this movie, and then you compared it to a movie you would make. So I love
Exactly. Like that's what I hate about this movie. It's that it's trying to be too deep where it's not really. It's we all know that this is trying to be like the Wish movie. And it failed. It failed tremendously. It was
It's like the
not
director
scary.
saw Pulp Fiction and said,
Right.
"Oh, this is like people love this." And what you do is you go back and forth in time and you tell a non-consecutive story. So he did that, but he did it in a story in which that framing of the or that structure of the plot, it added nothing to the plot. All it did was make your movie a boring mess.
It did. It was. It was. And that's all really it is a movie trying to be too deep when it really wasn't. It was just it was an embarrassment, really. I would be embarrassed if I directed this movie, if I was a
You
part of
should be
this movie.
ashamed of yourself, Friendship Game director.
Yeah, you should be very, very ashamed. And get mad at the group of people who motivated you and say, yes, this is a great idea. Do it. Yeah, yeah. Rather than telling you, throw it in the dumpster, burn it up, destroy it. And moving on.
Yeah, moving on. My number 4th most oily and your number 3 most oily. This is Jeepers Creepers.
Jeepers Creepers, where you get those beepers.
Which, another reason this movie sucked was that it didn't even have the Jeepers Creepers song. It had a knockoff fake song that it was like they got Postmodern Jukebox to do like a different version of the Jeepers Creepers song just so that they didn't have to pay for the rights of that song. And this movie was an absolute train wreck.
So Jeepers Creepers was one of our very first episodes. And we hated it as the weeks went by because we had such copyright issues And we talked trash about the non-Jeepers Creepers song, and we kept getting copyrighted by that stupid non-Jeepers Creepers song. It was ridiculous. Oh, my goodness gracious.
This is one of those movies I have nothing good to say about it. One, the writing sounded like it was
AI generated.
not an AI generated, but just like maybe a high school senior where every line just sounded so cliche and sounded so unnatural when the characters were bickering. And one of the ones that stick out in my line is like the characters are just all brooding, and one says like, we're not hunting him, he's the hunter. And it's like he's a spider and we're flies in his web. Like, there's no teenage girl that's locked in a murder house that's ever gonna say the line, I'm a fly trapped in a spider's web. It's so ridiculous. There was a scene where they first entered the house and out of nowhere, a fancy chandelier falls from the ceiling and crashes right in front of them.
Yeah, oh yeah. It's a fun. I know that one is already a cult classic of a trashy film, but oh gosh, it was
The original Jeepers Creepers.
Yeah.
This was Jeepers Creepers Reborn, which was,
Ugh.
I guess, a soft reboot or kind of like the fourth movie. I'm not 100% certain.
I think you nailed it because you felt like the beginning of the movie was amazing. The first intro, like the first 5 minutes were so great, and then it felt like a whole different 360 movie as soon as the younger characters came into play.
Sure, and that's the insidious part about this movie, is that the opening scene, it had two actual named actors who have starred in real movies, and they have great chemistry, and then not only that, they're actually, it looks like on the set of the original Jeepers Creepers house. And then I think that whole sequence was filmed separately, pitched to producers to get, the $20 million budget or whatever money got wasted on this movie, and then they just hired film students.
Yeah, yep, I agree with you. I think that's really what happened with this film. What I love about this movie is that it became a constant joke for us, where we're like, the Coachella event.
Yeah, a lot of great memes spawned from this shithole. Which it was the Coachella of cosplay, and there wasn't a single cosplay. Like, the writers had no idea what cosplay is.
There wasn't a single, but we ended up finding some lore into that. Like the guys who were, like the newscast or whatever, they were wearing these T-shirts, and it's an actual film fest event, indie film fest event, is what we ended up finding out.
It was like a horror fest.
Yes, which we ended up finding out. It's like, oh, that's where that lag came from. It's a horror Coachella event of horror movies or horror cosplay or whatever.
It was just, they had the fest on hand, and they're like, we'll shoot our movie here, and it's going to save us production budget.
Right. Or I think they, like you said, I think you nailed your suspicion on it. I think it was likely filmed by film students or written or done by those showrunners of that cosplay horror event thing that was on that set. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Don't watch it.
Yeah, definitely don't watch this movie. This feels it feels more amateur, honestly, than other shit movies like Murder Size, which are made for $30,000 by guys who just like movies.
Right. Even going back to our really first ever episode film that we watched.
Hold on, we're not talking now. We can't bring that up yet.
I'm not bringing it up. I'm just saying, I'm throwing it out there. That movie is better than this movie, and gosh, it's an embarrassment as well.
All right. Moving on here. My number 3rd most oily movie, your number 2. This is a real stinker. It is Hunt Club.
I hate this movie so much, I don't even want to talk about it. It's so horrible.
This is the classic case of how does it go? Show, don't tell. And this movie showed nothing. It was literally a bunch of dudes sitting around a campfire talking about how bad and evil they were. Yeah, and I guess, and this was a radical feminist film, so I guess we're supposed to be viewing it as a radical feminist, in which you can just assume these characters are bad because they're men. But the things they're talking about doing aren't even bad things. Like the one guy said, "Oh, I get judged by my female coworkers when I pick somebody up at the bar." It's like, well, what do you mean? Like you're a guy at a bar. Like what are you doing? Like you're just, or if you're a single woman at a bar, you're going to like mingle. You're going to meet people, and it's like all you had to do was have a scene where it's like, okay, instead of like having that guy talk about how he wants to pick up girls at a bar, maybe you show him at the bar, and instead of picking up a girl, he drugs her drink or does something that, or maybe
Very, very slimy.
maybe
Yeah.
attempts to do something like that, but you don't actually show it because you don't want like the rating, or you don't want to actually touch upon subjects that are like maybe a little bit more sensitive to some people, but to just say things that really don't sound offensive at all, and we're just supposed to take these guys as being horrible, which admittedly they are hunting women for sport, but like have your evil be shown through them hunting these women and maybe treating them like animals or game. And we had none of that. This was a movie that failed on almost every aspect of filmmaking, much like Jeepers Creepers.
Yeah, it had
And
this one though had so many continuity issues. There was a moment where there was she's supposed to be a hostage, but she has all her clothes on, and then she's constantly wardrobe in this movie for me was the worst that I've ever seen. No, wardrobe was horrible. Why hire them? They were incompetent, I feel. They had this weird Western flair to it. The beach scene where they were at a lake, but they had
they're on a dirt. They were at the shore of a dirty river.
yeah, they had what cheese on what was it? What was the when they
Oh, they had like a charcuterie board just sitting out in the sun.
in this like Georgia lake, and then there was the prisoners. A lot of them were in their sports bras and underwear. There was one of the girls who had she was like an organizer of a nonprofit, and then one scene she was barefoot, and then the next scene she had shoes, and they showed it, and that was a mess. And then, and just wardrobe was all over the freaking place.
Well, the thing about wardrobe is that these California writers apparently don't know the difference between hunting attire and ranching attire.
Yeah.
Or you had some guys with like cowboy hats and some guys with like the orange or camouflage hunting hat. And it's like, well, you're trying to say that all these people are rednecks, but like people who are cowboys aren't, hunting. They're not rednecks hunting for their next meal.
It felt like it was trying to be like Texas flair, but also Georgia Lake flair with the crocodiles all at the same time due to the location. Oh my gosh! It also a film that had big known actors. They had the wrestler,
Johnny
Rico, and then it had the girl from American Beauty in it, who was the main lead in this. This hunt club was not flattering for her. If I was in her shoes, I would pretend I would be like the Mario Bros. And like all those main leads, and pretend that I've never ever made this film. It was a mess. It was too focused on the message of the story, which is fine. Which for me, as a female, I didn't really see it that way, because it was again trying to be a radical feminist film. But then it's continued to make the women victims. That didn't make sense to me. I think it's a movie that was focused on the message that failed on the message, essentially.
Well, that was the other thing that we commented on was we had the woman who was she was the bleep this, but she was assaulted, and then like they rescue her, and she's like, oh like yeah, nothing. I'm so excited, I want to go on a hunting spree and kill all these men. And it's like, well, listen, you were like this is something that you would have PTSD from, and it's like how, like to say you're a feminist film and then also not take seriously the character who was actually assaulted in the movie and sort of just brush it off.
Like, yeah, it's ridiculous. It was ridiculous. I think, we talked about this. I think we nailed it too. It was a film written by a male who went into a woman's class and said, this is feminism. That's what it was. This is what this film was. And it's just a dude trying to be like, oh, this is the feminist, and I'm going to make this feminist movie, and then completely not hit the mark at all of what it means to be female. And that's what I felt. This is my opinion of that film, which is why I hated it. But really, it is at my bottom because of the wardrobe. It looked like Party City trash.
Well, there you have the feminist take. The movie didn't have the right wardrobe.
It was the Party City of cosplay of a feminist movie.
All right, moving on. This is my number 2 worst film, and Bubbles' number 1 most oily movie of 2023. The only movie we couldn't get through. Cryo.
I have no idea what happened in that movie. I didn't watch it. I was falling asleep.
We both... Well, the thing is, the runtime was advertised as being 91 minutes, which, as we all know, is perfect. And then an hour goes by, and we look, and there's still an hour left of the movie. If you are a low-budget indie filmmaker, your film should not be 2 hours under any circumstance. In fact, your first movie probably should be 59 minutes max. Do an Aliens versus Kid. Keep the runtime slim and trim as possible, because this is a movie where a bunch of people are sitting around in a warehouse or a basement and just talking about stupid, boring shit that nobody cares about.
It was ridiculous. The acting was actually not that bad, but oh goodness.
You know what? You might even be able to save this film in the editing bay if you cut out 50% of the runtime, because it's impossible.
I remember that I went back. Cryo is our first film where we did a 2-part and has only been our 2-part episodes, because we never came out with the second part because we just refused to watch the movie.
Well, I also guessed the ending.
Yeah, I went through the whole thing. We guessed the ending, and it was exactly what we guessed. I went through, confirmed it, and I click on one part and played a little bit, and then I went into the end, and it was the same thing. Nothing's changed.
They're still sitting in the basement. They're still backed up against all those cinder block walls.
Yeah. Oh, gosh.
Everybody's got drab jumpsuits on.
Terrible movie. I think it would have, I think that movie would have been saved because the idea was there. It wasn't written terribly. The acting wasn't terrible. The set wasn't terrible. The way it was filmed was pretty good. I think the problem was it was too dang long because it was boring. You're in a hole, you're not going anywhere.
It was too dang long, and the characters weren't interesting. When you have a one-room movie where you have just characters talking to each other the whole time, you have to have very interesting characters. And really, you also have to have good talent in those roles, because it becomes a character-driven film. And if you don't have good characters, there's nothing to drive your film. So I would never recommend Cryo to anybody.
I mean, I would recommend it to people who haven't subscribed to Oily Trash Movies. I would recommend it to the devil. I would recommend it to the Antichrist.
I would recommend it to Ryan Ash. I would recommend it to an IRS agent.
Yeah, I would recommend it to the tax man.
Okay, we are at the final movie. This is my least favorite movie of the entire 2023 Oily Trash movie season, and that is Jurassic Thunder.
Oh my gosh, Jurassic Thunder, the first ever episode we have ever made, the first movie we have ever watched as Oily Trash Movies. Oh gosh, the first movie I ever learned how to edit, the first movie that I have to watch like 25 times.
And the first movie in which the director himself, Milko Davis, actually reached out to us on Twitter, and he promised us that he'd get us screeners of his newer movies that were supposed to come out last year. They have not yet come out, so hopefully in 2024 we'll get to see one of the new releases from Milko Davis, and we'll be able to judge how far he has progressed. But Jurassic Thunder really holds a special place in my heart because, one, it's the movie that made Oily Trash Movies possible. If our first episode had been something that was just totally drab and boring like Aquarium of the Dead, that would not have made for interesting content whatsoever. Jurassic Thunder was so baffling in some ways that there was just so much to say about it. And this is another movie that probably shouldn't be compared to the other movies on this list because it was a micro budget film. Milko Davis shot all of the scenes on green screen. He did all of the CGI himself, I believe.
Built the sets.
Built miniatures for all of the sets, in fact. Very, he definitely is a man with a creative vision.
Yeah, he's literally a guy who makes movies because he loves to make movies. That's why Jurassic Thunder is not in my oily trash
Yes.
list. And also, Jurassic Thunder is, for me personally, I have a friend who knows Milko Davis, who was in his previous movie. So in the first movie of Jurassic Thunder, do you remember? Or he was in one of those films. He was either in the zombie one, the
Z-Rex?
Resident Evil, or yes, something like that. He was in one of those movies. So I know someone who knows Milko Davis.
Oh my goodness, we need to get
person.
autographed copies of Jurassic Thunder on DVD. But yeah, I also love Milko Davis. The fact that he was such a good sport, even though we dumped on him so hard, he's earned a special place in my heart. And really, putting Jurassic Thunder at number 1 on my most oily movies is my way of paying respect to Milko Davis. I do respect his grind and hustle, but at the same time, I do think that the movie was pretty bad. But you know what? I'm excited to see what he has coming down the pipe. I've seen trailers for his upcoming movies. They look better than Jurassic Thunder looked. So I'm excited to see him progress. And I will watch and review every Milko Davis movie that comes out as long as we have a podcast, because this is the kind of content that I enjoy seeing and discussing as far as movies go. And Jurassic Thunder is number 1 on my most oily list because there's so many things that you could have done to fix it. So many things didn't work. The car chase scenes were totally devoid of tension. Some of the humor was framed so poorly. Like, there was a scene where our funny lead guy, who also plays Donald Trump and the news reporter, he punches the dinosaur in the nose. And that's a great callback to what is it? Conan, where Arnold Schwarzenegger punches out the horse or the camel. I believe he punches out one of either of those animals. And you have a man punching a fucking Tyrannosaurus Rex in the snout. That should be hilarious. Yeah. And it should be shot like dramatically, but it happens in a split second, and then they're running away where you don't even realize what you just watched. And I think that's the kind of mistake that you do see in amateur filmmaking. If Davis had put a little bit more I don't want to say a little bit more care into that shot, but it just framed it differently, or maybe like had it slow and you have like a effect as like the fist is coming in, and maybe the dinosaur is a puppet and you have like the puppet like knock its head back and like take a few steps back and then like sort of shake its head in confusing like it, or like it's sort of shaking out the cobwebs in its head. That could have been hilarious. I would have probably by default given $4 to a movie with an awesome scene where a guy fucking punches out a Tyrannosaurus Rex. How cool would that be? But the scene was totally botched, and as a result, it's wound up on my number 1 most oily film.
Oh gosh. So for me, again, I watched this film about 25 times, and I ended up seeing things that we completely missed. I loved the little hidden gems that were there, and it is a film that really makes it an indie film. It is a film that is quote unquote indie. It's just a bunch of guys just wanting to make a movie, trying to hustle and trying to get funding for it, making everything from scratch, making the idea from scratch. And I have the deepest respect for that, which is why it's not in my bottom. But overall, it was a pretty oily movie. It was, goodness gracious, iconic scenes for sure. The T-Rex zooming in on the African,
The
what were
Warlord.
they? The warlords, and then that CGI, the CGI, the whole meme, the birth of oily trash movies meme as to why we always mention Jurassic Park was because of the kitchen scene, was because of this film. That's where it originated from. That's where it comes from, was this film. And also, the there was also there was the scene I wanted to mention. Oh, the Russians, they were hilarious. The LOL, the subtitle says LOL. What was another thing that I really appreciated about that movie?
Well, the Donald Trump
The
character was
super,
fun too.
yeah, the Donald Trump character, the door opening slowly when we're trying to see the first dinosaur come
Oh
out
yeah,
with
and it's
machine
lower. It takes
guns.
like a minute for
It takes like a
the
minute.
door to slowly open.
Talking about marijuana, the Russians talking about, what was it, liquidized marijuana, or there was this scene about marijuana which was hilarious. And you mentioned something that was so funny. You're like, what? Trying to get the dinosaur high. Commander Sanders was hilarious. The just the entire film was just so unique in its oiliness that it has a really wonderful special place. And the fact that it was our first ever episode, special place of oily trash movies. Biggest respect. But again, it was a terrible movie. Go watch. I recommend this to our 1,050,000, whatever, 1 million
750,000 weekly viewers.
our viewers. I recommend this. If you haven't seen it, I recommend it. Watching it either on drugs, if you're on shrooms, maybe it would make you angry. Who knows what would happen? Oh goodness, it's a terrible movie for sure.
Yeah, and I do want to say that even though like the last 5 movies we talked about, these are films that I would not recommend really under any, like, to be serious, I wouldn't recommend watching those films under any circumstances. Jurassic Thunder, even though it's bad, I do believe it's a good kind of bad. I would recommend watching that if you like watching bad movies and laughing about them, because that it really does get the job done. And that's why I respect Milko. And I'm gonna give him a shout out in the title of this movie, or the title of the episode, like on YouTube. Plus Milko Davis shout out. So I hope you see this. I am genuinely looking forward to. I think there's Ghosters coming out, and then there was some other movie about witches, like cowboys versus witches. I haven't been able to find any information about that, but I think he has some issues with getting distribution, which is always tough for independent filmmakers. But I hope we get to see those releases very soon. And yeah, big shout out to Milko Davis, because truly, without him, I don't think there'd be an Oily Trash Movies podcast right now.
Right, I agree. Shout out to him for sure. Continue making movies, because again, he is the kind of guy who is literally just making movies because he loves making movies. And we kept saying that on our episode. If you haven't seen that first episode, which again, it's grungy, it is raw, it is us trying to figure out who we are.
All right, well, that's our top 10 most oily movies of 2023. I think I do want to give a special shout out to American Cherry, which was also an abhorrent film. It didn't make our list. That was pretty bad. What else did we really hate?
A Toxic Burrito Story.
That was a bonus episode. That one doesn't count. We do have some shitty bonus episodes, like Babezilla versus the Zombie Horde, which we never even released that episode. It was so bad.
Because I can't. It was so bad. I'm like, I don't want people to know that I watched that film, Babezilla. I was horrified.
All right. Well,
I was horrified.
I think that's...
Dark Cloud.
I don't know. Dark Cloud wasn't so bad, I don't think. I had that one up a way higher than you did.
Well, Grim Cuddy. It is a terrible teen movie, but it passes. It's just good enough because that creature was terrifying. It was scary.
The creature was fun. All right, well, that was the top 10 worst movies we've seen. Make sure to tune in next episode. We're going to go over our top 10 favorite episodes of the year. And then we'll be moving back into our traditional movie review episodes for year 2 of Oily Trash Movies. And with that, take care, comb your hair.
And remember to mace directly in these terrible oily movies' face. Bye!